Some stories stay with you, not because they're loud, but because they feel too real. What you're about to hear is based on disturbing first-hand accounts from the Appalachian backcountry, where silence hides things better left unseen. If you enjoy slow-burn, realistic horror that crawls under your skin, make sure to subscribe to Creepy Souls, new stories every day that you won't forget once the lights go out. I grew up in southern West Virginia, so I know those mountains better than most. But that doesn't mean they're safe. There are old roads up there that haven't seen cars in decades, trails that barely exist anymore. They pull you in with their silence. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself in places that don't quite feel right. That's where I was the summer this happened. I'd taken a week off work, telling myself I was going to clear my head by hiking one of the old fire tower trails outside McDowell County. It wasn't a marked trail, not anymore, but I'd heard the tower was still standing. I figured it'd be a good spot to rest, maybe take a few photos. The hike up was harder than I expected. The ground was soft with rain from the night before, and the trail looked more like a game path than anything people actually used. Branches clawed at my shirt. My boots sank in mud that smelled of rot and wet leaves. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my own breathing and the scrape of my boots on stone. By the time I saw the tower through the trees, I was exhausted. It was tall, metal-framed, with a wooden cabin at the top, just like the old black and white photos I'd seen. Rust streaked the legs, and the wood looked dark and swollen from years of rain. I half expected the stairs to collapse under me, but they held. When I pushed the cabin door open, I froze. There was a man inside. He was sitting on a metal chair, hunched forward, his hands folded over his knees. White beard, old denim shirt, sunken eyes. He looked like he'd been waiting there. I stammered something like, "Didn't think anyone still manned these things." The old man gave a small smile. His voice was calm, almost gentle when he said, "You look tired. Sit a spell. Got water if you want it?" On the little table by his chair sat a battered thermos and 2 tin cups. I hesitated but sat down anyway, figuring he was just some old-timer who liked keeping the place company. We talked for a few minutes, small things, the weather, the trail. Then, casually, he said my full name, not just my name. My hometown, the street I grew up on. He even mentioned my mother by name. I remember my mouth going dry. I asked him, too quickly, "How do you know that?" He didn't answer directly. He just shrugged and said, "Folks remember what they remember." Funny what sticks. The way he looked at me, it wasn't threatening, but it wasn't right either. Like he was holding back a bigger smile or maybe a bigger truth. I left before finishing the water he poured. I muttered an excuse about needing to keep moving before dark, and he just nodded like he'd been expecting me to say that. The walk back down was worse than the climb up. The whole time I felt like someone was behind me, just out of sight, matching my steps. The woods had that strange, heavy stillness again, like the trees were holding their breath. When I finally reached my truck, I sat inside with the doors locked, shaking harder than I wanted to admit. That night, back at my motel in Welch, I asked the desk clerk if the old tower up on the ridge was still used. She gave me a strange look and said, "Ain't been staffed since the 70s. Place is falling apart." I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I told myself I'd imagined it. Maybe he was some local who knew my family. Maybe I just hadn't recognized him. Appalachia is full of people who remember things you'd rather forget, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. My mother's name, my exact address as a kid, those weren't things strangers knew. And my own name wasn't in any public records. Long story, but when I was younger, I had it legally changed after some bad family history. The name he used wasn't the one on my license, it was the one I hadn't spoken aloud in years. That afternoon, against every instinct, in me I drove back. The trail was the same, muddy, quiet, overgrown. The air smelled heavier, like moss and wet stone. But when I reached the clearing where the tower had stood, my stomach dropped. The tower wasn't there. I don't mean it had been torn down. I mean it looked like nothing had ever been built there. Just a bare patch of land covered in weeds and saplings. No concrete footings, no rusted metal, no boards rotting in the grass. Nothing. I must have stood there for 10 minutes, trying to understand how I could have climbed stairs that apparently didn't exist. The silence pressed in on me. I felt sick, dizzy. Finally, I turned back, half running down the trail. Every shadow felt like it leaned toward me. I didn't go back to the motel. I drove straight home, across county lines, swearing to myself I was done with those mountains. But the thing about leaving a place like that is, it doesn't leave you. 2 weeks later, I was in my apartment in Charleston when the phone rang. It was an unknown number. Normally I don't answer those, but I picked up. No one spoke at first. Just faint static, like wind blowing across a microphone. Then a man's voice said my old name. Slowly, carefully, the same way he had in the tower. I hung up, heart pounding. The next day I checked with the phone company. They told me the call had never registered. No record of it. That was 3 years ago. I've changed numbers twice since then, but sometimes late at night, my phone will buzz with an unknown caller. I don't answer anymore. But I can't bring myself to turn the phone off either, because part of me thinks he's still up there, in a tower that shouldn't exist, sitting with his thermos, waiting. And somehow, for reasons I'll never understand, he remembers me. I've gone camping in the Appalachian since I was a teenager. Those mountains have a way of swallowing noise, leaving you alone with nothing but the crunch of your boots and the damp smell of moss and wood smoke. Last October, I decided to spend a long weekend out there, just me and my younger brother, Daniel. The plan was simple: drive out past Fayetteville, hike into a spot we used years ago, and set up camp near a stream we both liked. The roads out there are rough, winding through hollows so deep your phone loses signal for hours. The air smelled of rain-soaked leaves and coal dust, faint traces of old towns crumbling into the hillsides. Daniel had been the one to push for it. He said he needed to clear his head. I didn't argue. He always carried a kind of restless weight with him, and being out in the woods seemed to settle him down. The first night, we sat by the fire with our tents pitched nearby. His tent was the same one he always used, green canvas with a bent pole he propped with duct tape. We talked about old memories, about girls we dated, about how different life felt now. I swear I remember the way he laughed, the way the firelight caught his face. I even remember the sound of him unzipping his tent later, telling me good night. The days blurred together. We hiked along old trails that had half fallen away, marked only by rusted metal signs leaning in the dirt. We ate jerky and instant noodles, joked about how bad the coffee tasted. One afternoon it rained, and we sat under a tarp, watching the mist roll through the valley. He told me things I'd never heard before, fears he had, regrets about choices he'd made. I remember listening, feeling closer to him than I had in years. On the last morning, we broke camp. His tent came down first, and I remember him folding it, struggling with the wet canvas while I laughed and told him he was doing it wrong. We hiked back to the truck, tired but content. By the time I got home, I had over 100 photos on my phone. Shots of the campsite, the trails, the fog curling through the trees, even a picture of both tents by the fire ring. I was excited to show them to my family, especially my mum. She always worried when I went out there. But when I told her about the trip, about how good it had felt to spend time with Daniel again, she just stared at me. Her face went pale and she shook her head slowly. "Honey," she said softly, "Daniel's been gone for 5 years." I laughed at first, thinking she was joking or had misunderstood me. But the look in her eyes, confusion, pity, fear, it made my chest go cold. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and opened the photos. I showed her the tents, the fire pit, the trails. I scrolled, expecting his smile to be there in at least one frame, but he wasn't. Not once. The green tent stood in every photo. But Daniel wasn't there at all at first. I thought maybe I'd lost the pictures of him somehow. Maybe the camera had glitched, or my phone had corrupted files. But I went through them one by one, over and over. The tent was always there, sometimes with the flap half open, like someone had just stepped inside. But Daniel was nowhere. I didn't tell anyone else at first. I just said the trip had been fine. But that night, lying in bed, I kept replaying everything in my head. The way he laughed, the stories he told, the sound of his boots on the wet leaves, the way he had looked across the fire at me. I knew those memories weren't imagined. They were too sharp, too full of detail. I could still smell the smoke on his clothes, still hear his voice. But the more I thought about it, the more cracks appeared. I remembered handing him the map, but when I looked in my pack, it was still folded, the way I'd left it. I remembered him cooking noodles one night, but the stove only had one pot with dried residue, like only one meal had been made. The worst part was his voice. I tried to mimic it in my head, to remember exactly how he'd sounded, but after a few days, I couldn't. The words were there, the conversations clear, but the sound of him slipped away like smoke. A week later, I drove back out to where we'd camped. The trail was the same, muddy, silent, fog hanging low. I found the fire pit, the spot where the 2 tents had been. My boot prints were still there, faint in the soil, but only one set. I searched the ground for signs of his tent, for the bent pole, for anything he might have left. There was nothing, just damp leaves and the faint smell of mold. On the way back, I stopped at a gas station near Oak Hill. The clerk, a man about my age, noticed my hiking boots and asked where I'd been. I told him I'd been up near the ridge, camping with my brother. He gave me a long, uncomfortable look. "Man," he said, "I went to school with your brother. He died in that wreck on Route 19 years ago." I didn't respond. I just nodded, bought a bottle of water, and left. Now, months later, I still don't know what to do with it. I have the memories of him, as clear as any real thing. I have photos of his tent, proof that something was there beside me, but nothing of him. Sometimes I scroll through those pictures late at night, staring at that empty green tent. Sometimes I swear I can see the flap shifting, like someone was inside, just out of frame. I've thought about deleting them, but I can't bring myself to. Because if I erase the photos, maybe I'll erase the memories too. And then all I'll be left with is the truth that my brother has been gone for years. And I don't know who I spent those nights with in the mountains, or worse, if I really was alone. I grew up in southern West Virginia, and I know the woods here well enough to respect them. My buddy Kyle and I had hiked together since high school, And that October weekend we decided to head out farther than usual, into a stretch of forest between Logan and Mingo County that we'd only heard about from older folks. They said no one kept trails out there anymore. That was exactly what drew us in. The drive in was long, the pavement breaking down to gravel, then to mud. We parked at the base of an old logging road and hiked in with packs following deer paths and gut instinct. The air was heavy, the kind that sits in your chest. Leaves were wet and clumped together, the smell of rot and rain everywhere. By late afternoon, the woods pressed in on us, no sound but the drag of our boots and the occasional crack of a branch. It was Kyle who spotted it first. Through the trees, tucked low in a hollow, sat a faded orange tent. At first, we thought it was abandoned, but as we stepped closer, I saw smoke still rising from a stone-ringed fire pit. It wasn't much, just thin wisps, but fresh. "Someone's out here," Kyle muttered. His voice was too low, like he didn't want whoever it was to hear. The tent flap was half-zipped, sagging. Outside, on a blue tarp, someone had laid out food, 2 cans of beans, a loaf of bread still in its wrapper, a half-empty jar of peanut butter. Beside the tarp was a battered notebook, pages curled from the damp. I remember crouching down, my fingers hovering above the journal before I even opened it. The top entry was dated that same day. It wasn't a long passage. Just a few lines in a jagged hand. 2 men woke up at 7:12. One wore a grey flannel, the other a black hoodie. They boiled water, packed slowly, headed east into the woods. I froze, because that was us. That morning, in the cabin we'd rented as a base, Kyle had worn his hoodie, I'd worn my flannel. We had boiled water for coffee before leaving. We had headed east. I showed Kyle the page, his face drained. "This is a joke," he said, but it didn't sound like he believed it. I flipped back a page. The day before. They arrived late. Left the truck at the road. Walked 3 miles before setting down packs they don't know yet. That last line made my skin crawl. We backed away from the tent, scanning the trees. Whoever wrote that had seen
Us, had watched us. Maybe they're hunting, Kyle whispered. Then where are they now?
I said. The fire hissed faintly, collapsing on itself. Around the tent were footprints in the mud, fresh, deep, leading off into the trees. But the woods were empty, silent. No voice, no rustle. We didn't linger. We put our packs back on and started moving, not speaking, following a ridgeline away from the hollow. But with every step, I felt exposed, like someone's eyes pressed into my back. When we finally stopped for the night, we didn't build a fire. We ate cold granola in silence, both of us watching the dark line of trees around us. I lay awake long after Kyle's breathing slowed. The forest creaked and shifted. At some point I thought I heard the snap of a twig behind us, but when I sat up, nothing moved. Still, I couldn't shake the thought, if someone was close enough to write about us that morning, they could be close. Enough now. By morning, we had already agreed without saying it. We weren't staying another night. We packed fast, shoulders tight, eyes darting to the shadows. The forest was hushed again, the way it gets before a storm, but something gnawed at me. That journal, those words. I couldn't just leave it. I told Kyle I wanted to go back to the tent before we left. He didn't like it, but he followed. When we returned to the hollow, my stomach dropped. The tent was gone. The fire pit was still there, stones blackened, ashes scattered. But the orange tent, the tarp, the food, gone as if they'd never existed. Only the wet ground showed where something had pressed down the leaves. Then I saw it. Resting on the fire ring, weighed down with a small rock, was the notebook. I picked it up before Kyle could stop me. My hands trembled as I opened to the newest page. It was dated that morning. They didn't sleep. One kept watch, the other pretended. They will go back. They'll find what I left them.
They'll know soon. I slammed it shut, my throat tightening. We're leaving, I said. Kyle didn't argue. We hiked hard, barely pausing for water. The trees felt endless, closing around us. At one point, I thought I saw a figure between
the trunks, just a blur of dark clothing, but when I looked again, it was gone. By late afternoon, we reached the truck. Mud clung to our boots, our clothes soaked in sweat. We tossed our packs in the bed and drove without speaking. It wasn't until we hit pavement that I opened the notebook again. The last entry was longer, written sloppier, like the pen had been pushed fast across the page. They think they're safe now. They're safe. They're driving west, grey truck with mud on the fenders. One keeps looking at the journal. They don't know if they should burn it. They don't know what I know. I snapped it shut, heart hammering. Kyle's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. We argued about what to do. He wanted to throw it out the window. I wanted to keep it, proof of what we saw. In the end, I stuffed it in my pack. That night, back home, I opened it again. The pages before the first entry I'd read were filled with other names, other descriptions. Couples, hikers, families, times, dates, what they wore, where they walked, how long they stayed. Some of the names I recognized from local news, missing persons reports that had never been solved. The last page was blank. For weeks I kept the notebook hidden in my closet, but sometimes I swore I heard paper shifting in the dark, as if new words were scratching themselves into place. When I checked, nothing had changed. Still, I can't shake the memory of those entries about us. The way they felt less like observations and more like predictions. And when I look at the notebook now, even though the last page is still empty, I know it's only a matter of time before it isn't. I go alone when I need to quiet my head. Last October, I took 3 days and drove into the Monongahela backcountry south of Richwood, where the roads narrow into damp tunnels of hemlock and the hollows hold fog until noon. I parked at a small pull-off the ranger had circled on my paper map. North-south trail, nothing technical, just miles of wet leaves and the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat feel loud. Everything smelled like rain and old wood. The trail followed a ridge, then slipped down into a valley where water moved under the leaves, but you couldn't see it. I walked until my socks were damp and my shirt stuck to my back. A grouse exploded out of deadfall, so close it made me swear.
Out loud, then the forest closed again. No bird song, only the slow drip of last night's storm. I'd planned to camp near a stream marked in pale blue on the map, but a side path caught my eye.
Calling it a path is generous. It was a suggestion of one, ground smoother than the rest, a narrow corridor between rhododendron. No blaze, no sign. I almost didn't take it. Then I did, because that's why I'd come. The corridor curved and narrowed. I noticed glass tumbled smooth like river stone, a broken blue mason jar lid half buried in moss, patterns of human touch turned soft by time. The floor tilted down. I heard water again, then the sound of my boot on something not dirt. Stone. It was a staircase. Moss had swallowed the edges, but the steps were there, a run of hand-hewn stone dropping into a shaded scoop of land. On either side, black gum and beech leaned in as if they'd grown around the idea of people passing. I followed, my breath shallow, every step damp and slick. At the bottom, the air cooled, touched with the sweet, rotten smell of leaves that
Never see sun. The shack sat in the basin like it had slid there and given up.
roof bowed, porch canted forward. The door hung on one hinge, grey wood splintered where a lock might have been. I told myself it was an old homestead, probably CCC era. I told myself it wasn't different from the other ruins I'd stepped into over the years. Inside, the floor flexed under my weight and made a sound like a breath. Something had nested in the corner, mice or bigger. A metal bed frame leaned against the wall, springs rusted into vines. Rain had found its way through a hole in the roof and turned a strip of plank into black sponge. It smelled like wet paper, mouse urine, and cold iron. There was a string tacked along one wall at chest height, clothesline maybe. Clothespins still clipped to it, swollen and grey. Below it, a narrow table, coffee can full of nails, a jar without a lid, a box of matches fused into one dark block. I saw the photographs last. They were clipped along the string in a row, old and curled, some sepia, some the washed-out colours of cheap film from the 80s, some white-bleached where light had hit. Families, always a family. 2 parents and a kid, sometimes 3 kids, sometimes grandparents on the ends. Each photo taken on a porch, the same porch. I didn't realize it at first. In one, the railing had a chunk missing. In another, the porch boards had a knot that looked like an eye. In another, the post was notched where someone had hung a swing. But the angles matched. The siding, the pattern of paint flakes on the rail, the crack in the top step. Same place, different people. Dates? None I could see. Names? None. Just faces looking into the camera without trying to look happy. My palm was damp where I held my phone. I took a picture of the wall, then one closer. The screen fogged when I breathed. My heart was up in my throat. I could hear water moving, under the floor somewhere, a thin sound, and every few seconds the shack made a small settling noise like a person thinking whether to speak. I told myself it was a hunting club's joke wall. I told myself this was just one of those half-kept places that sit between public land and private, used by whoever needs a roof when the rain comes in sideways. I told myself to leave. At the doorway, I looked back. The last photo on the string had moved, just a little sway like a draft. There wasn't any draft. Back at my camp that night, I ate in the dark and didn't light a fire. Fog thickened in the hollow until the world was only the wet smell of the tarp and the breath in my sleeping bag. Something stepped through leaves, at a careful, steady pace, and stopped short of my tent. It might have been a deer. I told myself it was a deer. I slept in pieces and woke with the image of that porch in my head, the knot like an eye, the missing chunk of rail. People standing there because someone asked them to or told them to. The faces weren't frightened. That was somehow worse. In the morning, I wrote the coordinates in my notebook as close as I could guess from the map, and the sun I never saw. I tied a strip of orange flagging to a beach at the top of the staircase. I told myself I'd stop at the ranger station in Richwood after I hiked out. I told myself I wasn't going back there alone. I told myself all of that, and still my hands shook, breaking camp. The ranger in Richwood was younger than me, hair pulled into a tight bun. Her name tag read Reeves. I described the staircase, the shack, the photos. I said, probably just hunters, tried to sound casual, and failed. Reeves didn't interrupt. When I finished, she pinned my map under a plastic ruler and stared at it, the blank square where I'd drawn a small X. Our maps aren't perfect, she said. A lot of old stuff in there, private inholdings, old mines, folks' camps. She glanced toward the office door, then back at me. "You'll show us?" "Yeah," I said. I marked the top of the steps with orange tape. She called someone on the radio. 10 minutes later, a man came in, 50s, face wind-cut, uniform faded at the elbows. Caldwell. No small talk. He looked at the spot on my map, looked at me, and nodded once like he'd already made up his mind about something. We drove as far as we could, then walked. The day warmed into a haze, fog lifting in sheets, the kind of light that makes distance look like a painted backdrop. Reeves led. Caldwell walked a little behind, eyes on the ground, scanning the understory in a way that read as habit more than caution. No one said much. The woods held onto last night's water, every log slick, every rock greasy with moss. When we reached the ridge, I slowed, expecting the side path's mouth to show itself. A soft line through the laurel, a break. In the fern, it didn't. Trees were where trees had been. The ground was simply ground. We were higher, I said. Or lower. It hooked right, then dropped. You could hear water under the leaves. There was glass, an old jar lid. We walked the ridge in both directions and then some. I looked for my flagging, that bright orange against grey bark. Nothing. Reeves watched my hands, not my eyes. Caldwell kept his face still and listened. I tried the slope anyway, pushing through rhododendron, measuring with my body where the angle had changed. Yesterday, I slid twice and caught myself on roots. My breath turned ragged. The forest took my noise and absorbed it. "Hey!" Reeves called, not loud. "Hey, come on back up!" When I reached them, Caldwell was studying my map. He put a blunt finger on the blank where my pencil X sat and said, almost to the paper, "We don't have a structure there." "I know what I saw," I said. I hated how thin it sounded. Reeves looked at Caldwell, not skeptical, tired. "We could sweep the drainage," she said. He shook his head. "Not today." She nodded like she'd expected that. I pulled out my phone. The photos were there. Thumbnails rode up like neat evidence. I opened the one from the wall and handed it to Reeves. She held the screen, thumb and forefinger widening the image, squinting. Caldwell leaned in and didn't. The picture showed the inside of a grey shack. Bed frame, table, light coming in wrong through a ragged hole. Along the wall a string was tacked up, clothespins. The places where something had hung were bare, cleaner patches on the wood, faint rectangular ghosts, no photographs. "I took 2, I said. There were photos, families on a porch. The
"Same porch? We believe you," Reeves said, and I could tell she meant it. She glanced at Caldwell again, and that glance carried weight I couldn't read.
Sometimes folks stage things, sometimes they move around. There are old property lines out here. People get territorial. Caldwell's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to spit out. Finally, he said, "If you don't see a blaze, don't take the path. If you see orange tape that isn't ours, don't follow it." He touched the map with the back of one knuckle. "You did right to tell us. Don't go back looking." I wasn't going to, I said, and I wasn't sure if that was true. We walked out with the light behind us and the air going cool. Reeves tried to talk about other trails I might like, good overlooks, places where the wind makes a sound like water. Her voice drifted and returned to her mouth, a loop of small kindness. Caldwell said nothing until we reached the trucks. He paused, with his hand on his door, and looked at the tree line like he was counting something only he could see. Back in town, I sat in my car a long time with the map open on my lap. The pencil X looked like a mistake a child would make, marking treasure on a page that didn't know it, Home didn't make it better. Mud dried on my boots in lacework. My pack leaned in the corner and made the room smell faintly of damp nylon and smoke that never actually burned. I told a friend I'd had
a good trip and heard my voice do that too light thing and didn't correct it.
3 days later, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, glossy, edges already curling. It showed the inside of a grey shack. I was in it, turned 3/4, one hand on the doorframe, looking at a wall, where a string ran and clothespins hung and photographs clipped. There showed families standing on a porch with a crack in the top step and a knot like an eye in the floorboard. I don't remember anyone behind me that day. I don't remember a click or a breath. I burned the envelope in the kitchen sink and then stood there with the fan on, watching a corner of the photo blacken and flare and stop, the image refusing to take flame unless I held a match to it too long. I didn't burn the picture. I slid it into a drawer I don't open and felt like I was leaving a light on in a house I don't live in anymore. I still have the map. I still hike. I don't leave the main trail now, even when I see a path that looks like it was made for me. Sometimes, on fog-thick mornings when the laurel presses close and the ground widens into a suggestion of stairs, I feel the tug in my legs and keep walking straight, hearing water under the leaves that I tell myself is only water. I could draw that porch from memory. The rail with the missing bite. The knot like an eye. If I'm honest, I think I always could. That's the part I don't like saying out loud, that before I found those pictures, I'd already been there. Not the shack, maybe, but the pose. The standing where someone tells you to stand. The looking into a camera, because you don't want to disappoint whoever's holding it. The trail wasn't there the second time. That feels like a mercy or a warning. I can't tell which, so I carry both. It was supposed to be a simple weekend camping trip. Just a break from classes before midterms crushed us. Nate found the site, some barely trafficked part of the Monongahela Forest, off an old forestry road south of Camden-on-Gawley, one of those places where the GPS turns into a spinning wheel and all the trail markers are just sun-faded ribbons stapled to trees. There were 5 of us. Me, Nate, Erin, Devon, and Sarah. We'd all crammed into Nate's car with packs and 2 tents parked at the base of a washed-out service road and hiked until we found a dry patch near a creek. The air smelled like pine and wet leaves, and even though the firewood was damp, we managed a decent blaze. By 11:30 we were laughing too, loud, half-drunk, and passing around a dented metal flask. The fog had started creeping in by then, hugging low to the ground like it was trying to smother the fire. That's when we heard it. A scream. Not a short one. It stretched out too long, rising and breaking like whoever was making it was running out of air. We all went silent. Devon stood up first. Was that a person? It came again, off through the trees, high, desperate. Female, maybe. We froze. It sounded close enough that I expected someone to stumble out of the dark, bleeding or crying, but no one came. Nate grabbed his flashlight and said, "We should check. What if someone's hurt?" The others hesitated, but I stood up. We'd all been raised on the same true crime podcasts. You don't ignore a scream in the woods. The 5 of us walked toward it. Our lights carved thin yellow lines through the fog, and the further we went from the fire, the colder it got. Leaves squished under our boots. The screaming came again. Same pitch, same length, same weird drop-off at the end. Erin whispered, "It's the same. Every time. The exact same." She was right. Each scream was identical. Not similar, exact. Like someone was playing a sound clip on loop. We stopped maybe 200 yards from camp, where the trees thickened and the moss muffled our steps. The fog was heavier there. The light from our flashlights hit the mist like smoke. The scream came again.
Exactly the same. No one spoke. Devon slowly raised his phone and hit record. We waited.
The scream repeated. He stopped the recording and played it back. I didn't expect it to sound worse on playback, but it did. Through the tinny phone speaker, the scream lost any remaining trace of humanness. It was too sharp, too clean, like someone trying to sound human, but missing something essential in the tone. There was a pause. Then the loop played again. And again, each time identical. Erin stepped behind me. That's not a person. Nate turned to say something, but just then the scream came again, only now it was closer. We all turned at once, swinging in every direction. The sound had moved 30 feet, but nothing was there, just mist, leaves, that creak gurgling, somewhere unseen. I don't remember who started walking first, but we all turned back toward camp without a word. It wasn't panic. It was something quieter. Like our bodies knew something our minds hadn't figured out yet. That night, we sat around the fire with the speaker off. No more drinks. Nobody joked. Devon deleted the recording before bed. He said, it didn't sound right. Not just the scream, the background too. He swore there were other sounds underneath it. Breathing. Something clicking, like teeth or maybe rocks. I didn't hear them, but I believed him. The next morning, no one brought it up. We acted like it hadn't happened, even though none of us had really slept. I'd lain in my sleeping bag for hours, ears straining, thinking I heard the scream out there again. Quieter this time. Fainter, like it had drifted farther away. By noon, the fog had lifted, and we decided to pack out early. Devon said he had a paper due, but I think we were all just relieved to leave. Back at campus, we mostly went silent about it. A week passed, then 2. The group chat dried up, but then something strange happened. Late one night, Sarah messaged me. Just one line, you still have the voice memo. I told her Devon had deleted it. She replied, no, not his, yours. You recorded it too, that first one, when we were walking. I hadn't remembered doing that, but she was right. I checked my
phone and there it was in a short audio file from that night, 37 seconds. I must have hit record without realizing it. I pressed play. At first, it was just us walking, leaves underfoot, breathing. Then the scream, sharp, clean. Identical to what I remembered. But something was off. When the scream ended, there was a faint
shuffle, like someone stepping behind the person holding the phone. I don't remember anyone behind me. Then a new sound. Low, whispery, too soft to make out, almost like someone mimicking a word. I boosted the volume. Still couldn't make it out. I sent the file to Devon. 5 minutes later, he called. His voice was shaking. Man, slow it
down. So I did. At half speed, the scream stretched, but something else surfaced under the scream. Not a voice exactly, more like a pattern, like it was trying to say something. It wasn't a word.
Not in English, but it had rhythm, cadence, intention. I stopped the playback. My ears were ringing. Later that night, Devon texted me a screenshot. He'd opened the file in an audio program and looked at the waveform. There were gaps. Even though the scream seemed solid, the waveform had these tiny, silent intervals like breath breaks, spaced too regularly. It's not a real scream, he said. It's constructed. I didn't respond. I haven't played the file again, but sometimes, when I lie in bed with the window open and the world quiet, I think I hear it again. Not from the phone, from the woods behind my apartment. A scream, just distant enough to question. Always the same, always almost human, and I can't stop wondering, what if it wasn't trying to scare us that night? What if it was trying to lure us? I took the trail alone on purpose. After my divorce finalized last spring, I needed something that reminded me I was still in control of my life. I've always liked the quiet of the woods, how it forces you to be present. So I chose a section of the Appalachian backcountry south of Spruce Knob, not far from an old trail that dips down into a lesser-known hollow. Remote, quiet, uncomplicated. I parked at a faded forestry gate and hiked in that first morning, sun just cracking through. A shelf of fog. The forest was damp from overnight rain, and the air smelled like pine, mud, and stone. Everything around me felt still and watchful, the kind of silence you only get when you're truly alone. Or so I thought. I saw the man ahead of me, around mid-morning. Just a figure at first, maybe 60 yards up the trail, walking in the same direction I was. Olive jacket, canvas pack, long stride. I slowed to keep distance, but he never looked back, never altered pace. I figured he'd eventually veer off, but he didn't. Every time I stopped, to adjust my boot, to take a sip of water, he stopped too. Never looked around, never moved side to side, just paused, as if waiting. By noon, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even though he never turned. The trail bent gently along a creek, and I lost sight of him briefly. When I rounded the corner, he was there again, maybe a little closer now. Something about the way he moved bothered
Me. Not wrong exactly, and just deliberate. Every step placed like he had all the time in the world. I tried calling out once, just a casual, "Hey," to test the waters. He didn't react. I told myself maybe he had headphones in, but I hadn't
seen any. Around 3 p.m., the trail narrowed into a dip between two ridges. The trees closed in. Light filtered green and grey through the canopy. That's when I noticed he'd slowed down just enough to stay ahead of me, always 30, 40 paces, like he was measuring it. I sat down on a moss-covered log, pretending to check my map. He stopped too, didn't sit, didn't turn, just
stood on the trail like he'd been set there by someone who knew exactly where I'd stop. After 10 minutes, I stood.
He started walking again. I felt my stomach knot. That night, I found a spot to camp near a bend in the stream, far enough off the trail that I felt hidden. I didn't light a fire, just unrolled my pad and listened to the woods press in around me. For a while I heard nothing. Then something shifted. Not loud, just a scrape, like boot tread on rock, maybe 50 feet away. I froze. Nothing followed. When I finally slept, it wasn't deep. I woke twice. Once to silence so complete it made my ears ring, and again to what might have been breath just beyond my tarp. I didn't move, just lay there, holding still, listening to the woods breathe. At first light, I packed without eating, just protein bar in hand, boots still damp from yesterday.
I didn't even check the map. I just needed to move. The trail twisted uphill, through laurel and black gum, every branch wet, smacking my jacket with cold morning dew. I kept glancing back, expecting to see him again. I told myself, maybe he'd
moved on, maybe he'd camped somewhere else, left early. But around mid-morning, the trail dipped again, And there he was, same olive jacket, same canvas pack, just standing, waiting. I stopped moving. He didn't. He just remained there, still as a dead tree. Then, without turning, he walked forward again. No sound, no urgency. That's when I finally felt it. Not fear, not yet, but understanding. He wasn't hiking, he was watching. Not like a hunter or a lost hiker. He was measuring, waiting for something. By noon, I started cutting my own trail off path. I dropped down into a ravine thick with wet ferns, scrambled across a dry creek bed, and climbed until my thighs burned.
I slipped twice, caught myself once, and the second time landed hard, bark scraping across my forearm. Still, I didn't stop. I pushed through saplings and deadfall until the trail disappeared completely. The air got dense, sound didn't carry.
Right. Every time I paused, I swore I could hear my own breath echoing back at me. I stayed off trail for nearly an hour before finding a logging road and following it east. The whole time I kept checking behind me, watching for movement, for that olive silhouette between trees. Nothing came. When I reached a service road, I sat behind a boulder and waited. I don't know for how long. Eventually, an older man in a red truck passed by and offered me a ride back to the ranger station. I didn't tell him everything, just that I thought someone might have been following me. He got quiet, said, "This stretch? Yeah, you're not the first to say that." At the station, I filled out a report. The ranger didn't ask for much, just nodded like he'd heard it before. Said they'd keep an eye out. That was 3 months ago. I haven't gone back. But I still think about the way that man moved, how he always kept the same distance, how he never passed me, never let me catch up. I think about how he never made a sound, not even on wet ground. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd followed him just a little further, to where the trail narrowed, to where it got too dark to see. I took time off work after everything with my dad. He passed in July, and by early September I was barely sleeping. I needed quiet. Something that made sense. Hiking's always been that for me. One foot, then the other. No decisions beyond. Water, food, and whether to keep going. I picked a 3-day loop in the southern Appalachians, not far from the Virginia-West Virginia border. An old trail known mostly to locals, winding through a hollow near a place called Red Root Gap. It started from a dusty little trailhead off a cracked county road.
No service, no traffic. Just trees and silence. The ranger station had already closed for the day when I arrived, but the trail register box was still there, a weathered wooden post with a broken hinge and a metal clipboard inside.
I signed my name and the date. Mark Hanlon, 9/12, solo, 3 days, hammock, food for 3, filter, rain gear. Out of boredom more than anything, I flipped back a few pages, and there it was. Mark Hanlon, 8/21, solo, 3 days, hammock, food for 3, filter, rain gear, same handwriting, same list. Letter for letter. I stared at it for a long time. Thought maybe I'd written it down last month and forgotten. But I hadn't been here in years, and I never write gear lists that neatly. Usually I just scribble something quick. But this entry was printed carefully, almost mechanically, like I meant for someone to read it. What unsettled me more was that the sign out column beside it was blank. Everyone else on the page had signed out. Dates, check marks, little smiley faces, but not this one. Not me. I stared at the older entry until the wind pushed the clipboard back into its box. Then I shut the lid and stood still for a long minute, listening. The trees whispered, but nothing else stirred, just the damp weight of Appalachian air, thick with the smell of moss and dry leaves. I should have left. I know that now, but instead I told myself it was a glitch, a coincidence, someone with the same name. Or maybe I'd forgotten something. I started walking. The first miles were quiet. Narrow trail, slick with mud and crumbling rock. I passed a rotted sign that just said, 5 shelter, the arrow sagging. The woods pressed in close. Every now and then I'd hear a woodpecker or the rustle of a squirrel, but the farther I went, the fewer sounds there were. No birdsong, no bugs. Even the air felt still, like the forest was holding its breath. I made camp early that night on a small rise near a dry creek bed. No cell signal, of course. I ate cold beans and read by headlamp until the words blurred. I kept thinking about that entry in the register. Same gear, same name, same trip. I told myself I'd ask the ranger on the way out, but I already knew something felt off. The second day took me deeper into the hollow. Trees grew tighter together here, branches tangled with old rusted wire fencing. I saw no one, not a single hiker, no boot prints in the mud, not even deer scat. Just silence. Around midday, I stopped to refill water at a small stream that looked barely moving. While crouching to filter, I saw something wedged between two rocks, a Ziploc bag. Inside was a folded map, water-stained and torn along the creases. My name was written in the top corner, Mark H., same pen as the trail register, same handwriting. There were notes in the margins, rough sketches, trail splits, warnings, steep drop here, watch for loose rocks, avoid ridge in fog, but none of it was mine. I held the bag for a long time, staring at my own name, written in a hand I recognized but didn't remember. Later that day, I reached the shelter, a 3-sided wooden lean-to with a fire ring and a mossy bench. A few scraps of trash were scattered around, a crushed ramen packet, a broken headlamp strap, nothing fresh. I checked the logbook nailed to the wall. The most recent entry, dated 8/22, said, "Storm rolled in last night.
Stayed an extra day. Thought I saw someone on the ridge. Left early. MH. I didn't write that either. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept the headlamp on low, watching the trees through the open wall of the shelter. Something about the
way the fog moved felt aware. Too slow, too deliberate. Around 2 a.m. I heard something behind the shelter. Not footsteps exactly, just weight shifting, like someone standing still. I didn't look. I didn't call out. I lay still until morning. When the sun came up, I packed fast and hiked out in a near run. The trail felt steeper than before. Familiar. Turns now seemed slightly different, like they'd been moved or copied wrong. Nothing major, just enough to shake your confidence. At the trailhead, I signed out. And then I went straight to the ranger station. The man at the desk looked to be in his 60s. Tan uniform, no name tag. He listened as I explained the register entry and the Ziploc bag, then nodded slowly. "You're not the first person this has happened to," he said. He didn't elaborate, just reached into a drawer and handed me a small spiral notebook. It was filled with stories like mine. Different names, same pattern. Signed in, never signed out. A few came back and found themselves already written in. Some had maps. One had left a note in his own handwriting on a tree. "If you see this, turn around." I asked what it meant. He just shook his head and said, The mountain remembers things. Sometimes it remembers you before you get here. I didn't argue.
I just left. I've kept the map. It sits in a drawer at home, next to the gear I haven't touched since. I don't hike anymore. I tell people it's my knees.
Or work. But sometimes, late at night, I open that map and look at the places I don't remember drawing. I trace my name in the corner and wonder how many other versions of me might still be out there, walking the same loop, making the same
stops, never quite finding their way back. And when I think about signing in again, something deep in my chest clenches. Not from fear exactly, but from the sick feeling that next time I won't come out either.